When power meets prejudice, who holds the gavel? A black judge, a racist cop, and a traffic stop that could change everything. On a quiet suburban street, a sleek black sedan drives down the road, the sun setting in the background. Inside the car, Judge Michael Carter, a distinguished black man in his late 40s, is driving home after a long day at the courthouse. He's dressed in a sharp suit, his demeanor calm and composed. The radio plays softly in the background. Suddenly, red and blue lights flash in the rearview mirror. Judge. Carter glances at the mirror, sighs, and pulls over to the side of the road. He turns off the radio and waits, his hands resting on the steering wheel. Officer Bradley Harris, a white cop in his early 30s, approaches the car. His posture is aggressive, his hand resting on his holstered gun. He shines a flashlight into the car, lingering on Judge Carter's face. "Est oui, Officer Harris?" usher him gruffly, license and registration. Judge Carter reaches slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He hands over his license and registration. Judge Carter, patient. Calmly, "Here you go, officer. Is there a problem?" Officer Harris, skeptical. "This your car?" Judge. Carter, pauses, slightly taken aback. "Yes, it is. Why do you ask?" Dietz. Officer Harris, narrowing his eyes. "You sure about that? Doesn't look like your kind of car." Judge Carter's expression hardens, but he keeps his voice steady. "Isusus, Judge Carter." Firmly, "I'm quite sure, officer. I've owned this car for 3 years. Is there a reason you're questioning me?" Officer Harris, ignoring the question. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Judge Carter hesitates, then complies, opening the door and stepping out. He stands tall, his suit immaculate, his demeanor calm but firm. "Yes, Judge Carter." Calmly, "Officer, I'd like to know why I've been pulled over." Officer Harris, smirking. "We'll see about that. Hands on the hood, please." Judge Carter's jaw tightens, but he does as he's told, placing his hands on the hood of the car. Officer Harris begins to pat him down, his movements rough and invasive. "Isasa, Judge Carter." Through gritted teeth. "Officer, I'm a judge. I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal." Officer Harris, sarcastically, "A judge, huh?" "Yeah, sure you are. We'll see about that." The tension is palpable as Officer Harris continues his search, clearly not believing Judge Carter's claim. The tension on the quiet suburban street is palpable as Officer Harris finishes patting down Judge Carter. The sun has dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over the scene. Judge Carter stands tall beside his car, his suit slightly rumpled from the invasive search, but his demeanor remains calm and composed. His eyes, however, burn with a quiet intensity as he locks gazes with the officer. He knows this isn't just about him, it's about the systemic bias that has plagued countless others who look like him. Officer Harris steps back, his hand still resting on his holstered gun. His earlier smirk has faded slightly, replaced by a stubborn defiance. He's not ready to back down, even as Judge Carter's calm authority begins to chip away at his confidence. Officer Harris, skeptical. "All right, so you're saying this is your car. You got any proof?" Judge Carter's jaw tightens, but he keeps his voice steady. He's used to maintaining control in high-pressure situations, and this is no different. Judge Carter, firmly. "Officer, I've already shown you my license and registration. The car is registered in my name. I don't know what more proof you need." Officer Harris narrows his eyes, clearly unconvinced. His tone becomes more accusatory, his words laced with underlying bias. Officer Harris, smirking. "Yeah, well, we've had reports of a stolen vehicle matching this description, and you fit the profile." Judge Carter's eyes narrow, his patience wearing thin. He knows exactly what the officer is implying, and he's not going to let it slide. Judge Carter, coldly, "Let me get this straight. You're accusing me of stealing my own car because I fit the profile? What profile, officer?" Officer Harris hesitates for a moment, caught off guard by Judge Carter's directness, but he quickly recovers, doubling down on his suspicion. Officer Harris, what? Defensively. "Look, I'm just doing my job. You're acting awfully defensive for someone who's got nothing to hide." Judge Carter takes a deep breath, his frustration simmering just below the surface. He knows arguing won't help, but he also knows he can't let this go unchallenged. Judge Carter, calmly but firmly, "Officer, I'm not being defensive, I'm being honest. And I'm telling you as a judge in the 12th District Court that this is my car and I've done nothing wrong." Officer Harris scoffs, his disbelief evident. He crosses his arms, his posture becoming more confrontational. "I tesoro is Officer Harris." Sarcastically, "A judge, huh?" Yeah, sure you are. Let's see some ID that proves that. Judge Carter doesn't flinch. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out his judicial badge, holding it up for Officer Harris to see. The badge gleams in the fading sunlight, the official seal unmistakable. Judge Carter, firmly, here's my badge. Officer, now, I suggest you call your supervisor before this situation escalates any further. Officer Harris stares at the badge, his smirk fading completely. For the first time, doubt flickers across his face. He hesitates, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The weight of his mistake begins to dawn on him, but his pride won't let him back down just yet. Officer Harris, muttering, all right, just wait here. He steps back to his patrol car, radio in hand, and begins speaking to dispatch. His voice is low, but the tension in his tone is unmistakable. He's in over his head, and he knows it. Judge Carter watches him, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. He's seen this kind of behavior before, both in his courtroom and on the streets. It's a reminder of how far society still has to go in addressing systemic racism and bias. As Officer Harris waits for a response from dispatch, the camera lingers on Judge Carter's face. His eyes reflect a deep weariness, but also a quiet determination. This isn't just about him, it's about every person who's ever been unfairly targeted because of the color of their skin. As Officer Harris waits for a response from dispatch, the tension on the quiet suburban street grows thicker. The sun has nearly set, casting long shadows across the road. Judge Carter stands beside his car, his posture calm but his eyes sharp, watching the officer with a mix of frustration and resolve. He knows the situation is about more than just him, it's about the systemic bias that has plagued communities for generations. Suddenly, the sound of another patrol car pulling up breaks the silence. A more senior officer, Captain Lisa Morales, steps out. She's in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and an air of authority. Her uniform is crisp, and her expression is stern as she approaches Officer Harris. She immediately senses the tension in the air and takes control of the situation. Captain Morales, sharply. Harris, what's going on here? Officer Harris hesitates, his earlier confidence wavering under her piercing gaze. He stammers as he tries to explain himself, his words stumbling over each other. Officer Harris, nervously, Captain, I pulled this guy over for a suspected stolen vehicle. He's claiming to be a judge, but I'm not buying it. Captain Morales glances at Judge Carter, her eyes narrowing as she recognizes him. Her stern expression softens slightly, but her tone remains firm as she addresses Harris. Captain Morales, disbelieving. Judge Carter, is that you? Judge Carter nods, his expression calm but his eyes reflecting the weight of the situation. He's relieved to see a familiar face, but he knows this moment is about more than just his personal ordeal. Judge Carter, calmly, yes, Captain Morales, it's been a while. Captain Morales turns back to Officer Harris, her voice sharp and commanding. She doesn't mince words as she confronts him about his actions. Captain Morales. Harris, you've got some explaining to do. Judge Carter is one of the most respected judges in the district. What made you think he was driving a stolen car? Officer Harris shifts uncomfortably, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of his captain's scrutiny. He stammers, trying to justify his actions, but his excuses fall flat. Officer Harris, stammering, I thought he fit the description. Captain Morales cuts him off, her voice rising with frustration. She's heard enough. Captain Morales, cutting him off. Did you run the plates? Did you check the VIN? Or did you just assume based on his appearance? Officer Harris looks down, unable to meet her gaze. The silence that follows is heavy, filled with unspoken truths about bias and prejudice. Captain Morales sighs, shaking her head in disappointment. She knows this isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that has allowed such behavior to persist for far too long. Captain Morales, to Judge Carter. Judge, I apologize for this. It's unacceptable. Judge Carter nods, his expression serious but composed. He appreciates her apology, but he also knows that words alone aren't enough. This moment is an opportunity to address the larger issue at hand. Judge Carter? Nodding. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that, but this isn't just about me. It's about how people who look like me are treated every day. This has to stop. Captain Morales meets his gaze, her expression resolute. She knows he's right, and she's determined to take action. Captain Morales. Firmly, you're right, and I'll make sure this is addressed. Harris, you're on desk duty until further notice. We'll be having a long talk about bias and proper procedure. Officer Harris looks defeated, but he doesn't argue. He nods silently and heads back to his patrol car, his head down. The weight of his actions and the consequences are beginning to sink in. As Captain Morales turns back to Judge Carter, her expression softens. She knows this incident is a wake-up call, not just for her department, but for the entire community. Captain Morales, Sincerely. Again, Judge, I'm sorry this happened. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Judge Carter nods, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. He knows this is just one step in a long journey toward justice and equality. Judge Carter, nodding. Thank you, Captain. I hope you do. With that, Judge Carter gets back into his car and drives off, the weight of the encounter still heavy on his shoulders. The camera lingers on his face as he drives, the sunset casting long shadows across the road. The scene fades to black, leaving the audience with a sense of both the progress made and the work still to be done. In a courtroom, Judge Carter is seated at the bench presiding over a case. The camera pans to the gallery where Captain Morales is seated watching intently. The case is about police reform, and Judge Carter's voice is strong and clear as he delivers his ruling. Judge Carter. Firmly. This court recognizes the need for change. We cannot continue to allow bias and prejudice to dictate the actions of those sworn to protect and serve. It is time for accountability, for training, and for a new standard of justice. The camera cuts to a montage of protests, community meetings, and police training sessions. The message is clear, change is coming, but it will take effort from everyone. The final part is of Judge Carter standing outside the courthouse looking out over the city. His expression is determined, but there is a glimmer of hope in his eyes.